Joining me today on the Neil Wilkins podcast is Marcus Schaller. Now, Marcus helps entrepreneurs and revenue teams and marketers more generally to conquer their most frustrating marketing challenges. And this is going to be a very useful, very helpful exercise and conversation for us all, I think, because let's face it, marketing is a little bit frustrating, challenging, and a reasonable amount of chaos right now. So welcome to the show, Marcus.
Thank you so much, Neil. It's a pleasure to be here.
This is timely, isn't it? It's absolutely timely. We've got AI, we've got the current economy, we've got wars all over the place. This is a crazy world that we live in. So it's probably no wonder that marketers are finding this a challenge, to say the least. Is that kind of how you're seeing it playing out right now?
As always, right? I've been in this game in one iteration or another for over 20 years. And I think there's always, whatever change is happening is always creating chaos. I remember back when websites were a new thing and that was creating its own chaos. So yeah. So there's always, whatever it is, whether it's current events or technology changes, everything's always changing. And we have to, as entrepreneurs too, adapt to that constantly, while at the same time honing in on what are the fundamentals that really don't change over time. And that's kind of the art.
It's a kind of an art and a science as well, isn't it, really? Because, I've been sort of preaching the whole thing about, evidence and data-based decisions for a long, long time now, just to try and get a little bit more science in so that when a marketer particularly goes and talks to their management team, they can do it with confidence because they've got the evidence to kind of back stuff up. But here we're talking also about the art of kind of managing those communications as well. So it's a complex mix, isn't it?
It is, and it also depends very much on where you are in that spectrum of growth, right? So if you think about an entrepreneur in a solo situation, they don't have a team, and maybe they're in the first year or two, they don't have maybe a lot of data to pull from, right? So a lot of it is still intuitive, it's still anecdotal based on their experience directly with clients. And then to the far end of that extreme, you have a very large enterprise that has a ton of data, but what guides their decisions still, right? Because if you pull a lot of data, you could have clear evidence to go in 17 different directions, right? So it's like, what is the, I guess, fundamental mission that's driving the framework of the decision? And then how do you incorporate the data to be able to make a better decision within that?
So where does somebody start then? I mean, I'm just thinking of, you sort of reflecting maybe on some of your clients and, the people that you're talking to. And I'm thinking whilst we're talking here about, people that I'm supporting either individually or as larger businesses. I mean, where do you begin? Because, if you think about the broader, let's call it the extended marketing mix, to coin a phrase from the old style textbooks, there's a lot of constituent parts here. It could be product, it could be your target audience, it could be overall kind of macro market dynamics, it could be just trying to get some attention for the brand that you're kind of representing. Where is the starting point in Marcus's view?
It's a great question. I think I start out by zooming out a bit and framing it as there's essentially two ways you can look at this. There's a company whose purpose is to maximize shareholder value, and in doing so is looking for whatever market opportunities they can enter into to increase revenue and growth and everything that goes with that, right? I would say that most of us aren't in that category, right? Most people, certainly small business owners, but entrepreneurs, solopreneurs certainly, are not in that category. They're in the category of how I am expressing a vocation, a skill set, a passion, a mission, a purpose, and business is how I do that, right? So just to kind of separate that for a second, because my approach toward that latter group would be start with you, right? Don't start with, if you think about traditional marketing philosophy, it's like, start with your market and finding out the problems and gaps. And that's very relevant. And that comes in later. But if you start with first, who are you? What are you trying to create? What are your strengths and weaknesses? What problems are you passionate about solving? And how do those relate to both your strengths as well as then the market need, right? Because there is that Venn diagram overlap. But essentially, since most people, by definition, most businesses are relatively small, my first place is starting with understanding yourself, understanding what you care about, what problems you really want to solve. And then when it comes into the marketing tactics and how do you actually share that message, really looking at how those strengths influence that decision as well. Because if you think about, typical small business owner wearing all the hats and they're thinking about marketing is writing content and being on LinkedIn and speaking, whatever mix it is, really understanding like, what is it that you're drawn to? Because if you hate writing, you're probably not going to have a great time or a lot of success making that the foundation of your marketing, right? If you hate speaking, being a thought leader might not be the right way to go about it. So it's just really understanding. It's like know thyself first, right? The Oracle at Adelphi, right? Starting from there. And then from that point, you can start to look at where are the opportunities to be able to reach the right audience, the right customers based on your fundamental strengths and purpose.
And you used an interesting word there at the start of that answer to my question, which was the word purpose. Is there a higher? Do you think one of the challenges that people have had is kind of almost identifying that higher reason for being in business? Probably quite a lot more simple if you are a solopreneur, because you probably can feel it. It's in your heart. It's that drive. It's that passion that on a Monday morning you're waking up, you're getting out there to do more of your business. But from a business or a more kind of organization perspective, purpose is a really tricky one, isn't it? Because what is that binding thing together that draws you all together to serve customer or to serve a particular group of stakeholders? Do you think one of the challenges that marketers have right now, particularly if they're trying to, in a larger organization, kind of almost foster this collaboration, so we're all working together to one aim, it's because they haven't necessarily defined what is our core purpose? And if the core purpose is defined as, to sell more products, then it's missing the point. Do you think that can be one of the big frustrations out there?
I think that's the core problem. It's not the only problem, but yes, I quick, anecdotal kind of story here as far as to frame it. I used to work years ago for a very well-known, I will leave it unnamed, but very well-known, very high-end health club company that started out years ago being basically founded by three people that were passionate about fitness. And they had built this incredible brand that started taking off, right? That started to track this very high and very expensive place. And well, of course, that started making a lot of money, which, they got investment money. Long story short, it gets now owned by, not private equity, but something pretty close to it. And of course, the mission then changes, right? Because it's still on the brochure, on the website, on the marketing, it still is all about the member experience or whatever it is. But now in the actual conversations, that's kind of like, oh, that's nice. But what really is like our growth, our membership role, cancellations, all these different things. So it kind of flips around where at the beginning, it's about the core mission, the passion, the thing that brings everybody together, aligns them, and where the marketing is an expression of that, right? And then where the money is there to support that, the growth is there to support that mission. And then at some point in a lot of companies' growth, it flips, right? Where then it becomes about the growth itself and the revenue. And the mission behind it is like, yeah, that's kind of why we're doing it. And it's on a nice mission statement, but it's no longer the driving purpose. And I think that individual business owners, entrepreneurs can easily fall into that trap as well, right? And I think you see this a lot with people, and this has been for forever, but particularly with online business. Since the birth of the World Wide Web, there's been this like, you could create a business, it's online, you could just do it. Like, how can you make money? It's like you're starting from the wrong position, because basically it's like, what are you going to do that's actually going to be different than everybody else and that you actually care about spending the months and years to build versus the quick hit? So I think kind of like just grasping for the money is the fundamental problem. With a larger company, I think that really comes down to leadership. It really comes down to culture. As you're growing, maintaining that culture, as you're, in bringing in more investors, or if you sell to another company, I'm sure plenty of these kinds of stories where a company had this amazing culture and vision, and then it gets bought by somebody else and it It decimates the company, basically.
Do you see that there is almost then a part that a marketer can play at a certain stage in the evolution of a business, because it feels that you could be, as a marketer, a specialist maybe in the kind of the startup phase, should we say, and then it is something, then the business itself morphs into something new as you're describing it, and then maybe it's not quite so suitable for your skill sets or your preferences, and so in steps another marketer to kind of almost replace you, and you go off somewhere else to do the things that you've just been doing. So it's almost you become a specialist in a certain phase of a brand or a business's evolution. So it could be that you are there at the more mature phase of an organization where everything is now commoditized and everything is very mature, and actually your skill sets are very much about helping the organization to either scale or to pivot or to do something different and kind of move it on. But you don't necessarily have the skill sets for, being in a startup, because you need to work from an existing set of processes and systems. Is there something in here? I've not really thought about this before, but it's just coming through that maybe there are certain types of marketers for certain types of stages in the development or the life cycle actually of a business or a brand. And if you can align yourself with where that brand is, you can then be adding huge amounts of value, but you wouldn't have done, say, 5-10 years ago if that business is, say, 15 years old. Is there something in that, do you think?
Completely. I can think of for myself where I fit in, doing marketing coaching and focusing on, as you and I had talked about a little bit before we hit record, so focusing on the fundamentals, the positioning strategy, the messaging strategy, the why, the strengths, all that stuff. That's what lights me up. I would not be very happy in the alternative kind of situation where, I've done this for years too, where I was, do copywriting projects for larger companies, and you're there as a part of a bigger machine, which is fine. But that part of it, just kind of executing on somebody else's brief, that to me is the least interesting aspect of marketing, which is one of the reasons why I'm really making that pivot to focus 100% on the coaching and strategy side of things. And yeah, for other people that are in their career, if you, aside from the pace of a startup, if you are somebody who really enjoys the iteration of things and ideation and problem solving, you will love being in that startup environment. And if you're in a enterprise that's established, you might drive yourself crazy, and vice versa. Some people really just want to go in and they want to execute, let's say, specific technical marketing skills, and they want to do that. They won't be able to do that in a small company. They'd only be able to do very deep data analysis, let's say, or analytics in a larger firm that has a ton of activity. They might not be very happy in a startup or their own business, figuring out the strategy. I think when we think about marketing means so many different things, right? I think of marketing in fundamentals and strategy, and other people think of marketing as Facebook ads, right? So it's just very different. There's no one term for it.
Yeah, it feels like we're kind of evolving something as a thought and as an idea here, because it's almost then what we're doing is we're giving permission to either ourselves, as clearly you have, sort of from your past kind of work, and I definitely have, actually, as you were describing it. I was thinking, yeah, similarities there with certainly when I would have, as I always describe it, a proper job back in the day, whereas now obviously I'm a free spirit doing my own thing. But actually now what I found is that by doing that, it's almost like I served my time learning the principles, exploring and experimenting with the different, as you say, different facets and types of marketing definition. From, I've been a product manager, I've done strategy, I've done market development, I've, done campaign and execution and all of that, as well as kind of being a very junior marketer, just supporting everything. Whereas now I've kind of found that the best thing for me is to see a completely blank, empty sheet of paper or a whiteboard that has nothing on it, and actually working with others to kind of do alchemy, really, produce gold from other people's ideas. I don't have original ideas. That's not a skill I have, but I can put other people's ideas together and create even better stuff. That's my kind of preference and my skill. So is it what we're saying here that it's kind of almost to overcome the ultimate marketing challenge, which is, adding the most optimal value you can, is to kind of go inward and really reflect on my preferences, my skills, where I can add value, actually what I'm looking for, what excites me, what motivates me, before even then thinking about which sector, what kind of job level, what kind of salary do I want. It feels like there's a lot of kind of soul searching in many ways that a marketer needs to do before kind of going there, really.
Mm. Yeah, to your point that you made earlier, you have put in your time in the trenches, as have I, right? Different types of careers, right? But ultimately, if you're at the beginning of your career, you don't know yet, right? You might not know yet what you really like or don't like, and it's like taking the time to really explore different things before you worry too much about it. But yeah, to your point, once you've been in the game for a while, you start to get a feel for what types of environments really light you up. And marketing is like most vocations, where if you're in the right fit, there's nothing better, right? There's no better way to make a living. But if you're in the wrong fit, it's just drudgery, right? It's like slogging through. And I think one of the challenges too, I think when it comes to what you mentioned about the environment and the pace and the economy and different things that are challenges, is that the tenure of marketing leadership in particular tends to be on the shorter side. I think that's problematic, right? Because regardless of where you are in your fit for, early stage startup or scaling an enterprise or grow, just maintaining growth for an enterprise, if you can only expect to be in a position for 8 to 16 months or 8 to 12 or whatever the number is, it's really hard to even use those skills, right? Because marketing, as with sales, tends to have a very quick expectation of impact or turnaround time on results. And the reality is that unless you're starting with a very, very strong foundation and a lot of data and a lot of things that are already working, and then you can double down on those things, it's a lot harder to build something from scratch and guarantee that by 3 months from now we're going to have a certain number of leads. And so I think that a lot of it has to do with also finding not only the type of company size wise, but the kind of company culture wise. And if you're a CMO, for example, and you're going into any startup or an enterprise, really understanding their expectations. Because if the C-suite thinks that if you don't hit a certain benchmark by 8 months or 6 months or 12 months that you're out, you want to know that ahead of time, because you won't be able to invest in the things that are going to, like a podcast that might grow exponentially in 3 years, but won't have much of a dent in 3 months.
Yeah, and it feels as you're describing that maybe what we're kind of advocating here is to think of almost everything like projects. And I'm using the word project with a lowercase p, not big projects, but actually thinking of our own careers and our own consultancy and whatever decisions that we take as marketers, communicators, business developers, or whatever. And we see these activities as like almost little mini projects on our overall journey, so that if we want to go and explore a different sector, or if we want to take on a role that is maybe, I don't know, more project management or something like that, rather than pure mainstream marketing, it's okay to do that if we see it as a project that's part of a bigger kind of system or journey that we're actually on. So it feels like by being a little bit more conscious over those building blocks that we need to put together, we can actually choreograph a really, really interesting career here. That sometimes it might involve something that's a little more kind of go it alone. So, I start my own business, or I do something a little entrepreneurial. Or at other times I think, no, I'm going to go for work for a big enterprise, and we're going to learn how to, work with multiple internal stakeholders, because I've never done that. So I'm going to try that out. And maybe if I put a time scale on it, so maybe I say, right, this is a 3-year project with a lowercase p. And then when I'm done there, I'm going to then go and do this. So it's almost like planning out your own journey in some ways. Now that would sound to me really exciting, because I think one of the challenges is getting stuck in a rut. And as you've kind of sort of said here, the worst thing is kind of just being in the wrong place. So would that get over it, having these little kind of mini sub projects that you've put together? And sometimes that's going to change, but maybe plotting out maybe the next 10 years in little sub projects and saying, okay, with a fair wind and with the right support, I can actually do these little sub projects and look where I will be if I complete all of that. Now, as a planner, that sounds really exciting. How does that sound to Marcus?
Well, I think the further along you are in your career and your experience, and that can mean different things for different people. It doesn't mean you have to be in for 20 years or 30 years, but the further along you are, the more you will understand your own strengths and weaknesses and things that you're drawn to. And it may be easier than to plot. However, right, thing to think about is before 2 years ago, or whatever it was, none of us really heard of ChatGPT, right? So if part of that was, if your plan was to, I really like writing and I just want to write long form content for SaaS companies, there might be now a time where you, maybe not, but you might have to re-engage that and think, is that something that's really viable 5 years from now? And I think certainly looking at the next step, I love the idea of having the project lowercase p attitude toward it, because really what you're doing is building skill sets. And those skill sets they are modular and you can recombine them in any number of ways. And the more that you add, like getting to that T-shaped marketer kind of model, right? The more of these different skill sets you can add, the easier it is for you to then adapt to whatever changing situations are happening. So you can look at it, to your point, and in addition to saying in 10 years, I want to kind of grow up into this kind of direction. Another way to look at it is to say, where are there gaps in my skill sets? So you could say, well, I'm very good as a technician. I'm very good as an operator. I'm very good to be able to execute on somebody else's vision. What I haven't had a chance yet to do is to lead a team, or I haven't had a chance to do the ideation at the beginning. So you might look at ways to try different aspects of a marketing role so that you can fill in that. And you might decide, I don't like leadership. I don't like having to come up with the ideas. Fine, but at least you had that experience, because if you're working with a team of any size, there's going to be times where you have to step up and be more of a leader, even if that's not technically your title.
Yeah, so it's kind of like coming through with a set of job descriptions, I guess, where, I love this whole gap idea, because there's never probably been a better time for doing a gap analysis of your own skills, expertise, preferences, desires, and also the value that other people tell you bring, because it's often good to listen to, your colleagues, your manager, others in the organization, to get that feedback, because often if we're going down that journey, if we're just taking our own perspective, we can get very skewed and very almost misled by ourselves, because we might also decide to listen to certain things which are convenient, but they're actually not a real truth. It's just our perception. So there's a real kind of openness and honesty that needs to come through here, isn't there, in terms of both internal storytelling, but also how we start communicating this journey with others, because this is almost something that you can't, as a marketer particularly, kind of do it alone, because if you're going to be taking information in and starting to learn new areas, new things, we're going to need support, aren't we, here, either through a mentor or through other stakeholders, or by being introduced to other people or other organizations through a network. So there's a lot of collaboration going on here by the sounds of it, isn't there?
There is, and it makes me think also of another aspect of skill building that's so critical. It's beyond even the purely marketing related skills, but the soft skills, right? It's how good how good are you at communication? How good are you at collaboration? How good are your listening skills? One of the things that's so great about hosting a podcast, I've had several over the years. I just like creating podcasts. One of the things is it really trains you to listen, because as you know, right, you have to really listen and be present. That skill by itself is hugely important in any endeavor. That's never going to not be important, right? How good are you at influencing others with ideas? So if you're in a marketing position of any level and you have an idea for something, you need to know how to actually pitch that idea, sell that idea, get other people on board. So one of the things I think is the biggest challenges about marketing, especially in a leadership role, is getting the people above you to buy into something, because we can go into it and say, hey, sales are slipping. My team and I have some ideas how we can turn things around. But if you're just speaking marketing speak to the C-suite, to the rest of the people there, they're just going like, yeah, it's the marketing nerds again with all their ideas of pivots and, rebrands and all that. You have to be able to understand your audience internally too, to be able to get them on board with your ideas. Otherwise, you can have the most brilliant marketing concepts and campaigns and solutions in the world, but if nobody buys into it, it's not going to matter.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of us are always focused on that customer proposition, and it's almost like how we've all been trained, really, in the old traditional style of marketing. Is you understand the customer needs, you go and develop some services or products that have the right kind of benefits and give them a great outcome, and there you're a marketer. And we see that played in social media, on the website, and blah blah blah. It feels that there's something a bit deeper, more profound here, that we need to be able to create propositions for all of our storytelling. Everything that we do needs to have real clarity, real sense of purpose, direction, and probably simplicity as well. How do you see that sort of playing out, particularly internally, for an organization? Because there's so many kind of little nuances within each discipline, aren't there? Because finance has their own language, sales definitely has theirs, customer service is different to marketing, therefore they talk a slightly different language, and nobody understands marketing acronyms, and we always use those in a meeting. It's a problem, isn't it? How do we get over that?
Alignment, I think in terms of bottlenecks, I'm a big fan of the whole theory of constraints way of thinking, and focusing on what's the bottleneck that's holding you back. Because if you fix the bottleneck, it's the fastest way to start getting toward the results you're looking for. One of the big bottlenecks I have found is alignment. It's less of an issue the smaller the business is, but it could still be a huge issue. Even if you have two people that are partners, you can have two people with very different visions of what they're trying to achieve, right? So one of the big bottlenecks is the alignment issue. And not only speaking the same language, which may never happen, we're all going to have our own jargon and our own agendas, but ultimately, if you have a company of any size, you're going to have multiple departments, multiple products. Everybody thinks that their product is the most important. Everybody thinks that their idea of the ideal customer is the best one, right? So, and then you have the upper management, which is trying to make sure that their investors are happy. Their investors are saying, how are you growing? Like, there's all sorts of pressure internally and externally to just make things happen. And one thing that's really hard to do when you're under pressure is make good decisions. So I think what happens is the alignment issue continues to be a problem because it's so hard to actually make these types of decisions and stick with them, to actually resolutely say, this is the problem we're going to solve. This is the mission. These are the people we're going to solve it for. And we're going to double down on that because we have good data to support it. And we see the future is trending in the right direction. All these reasons to do it, right? But both internally as well. What's our purpose as a company, And we don't have the resources to be able to go after 17 different types of customers and personas and have 23 different variations of the product. We can't do it. One day we might be able to, and we can go for it. But to be reasonable about, like, if you have a marketing team with 4 people, you might not be able to execute on all these wild initiatives and support all these different product lines. So a lot of it is leadership, whoever is making decisions, be able to say, look, at the end of the day, we have to make a decision. And that doesn't mean we're going to just guarantee we're going to commit to it for the rest of our existence. But we can test, we can mitigate those risks. But at some point, you have to decide. And it goes to your point about simplicity. Because when you look at a website, you can tell when it's just a generic message with a generic value prop, with a generic product. What happened? They didn't want to make a decision. And the result of that is they're trying to be everything to everybody, which is like the cardinal mistake in marketing. And therefore, their messaging is a mess. It's complex. The people that work in the business can't even navigate the website, don't even know where things are. So ultimately, the big bottleneck is be able to lock in on what are you going to focus on? Who are you going to serve? How are you going to serve them? What are the problems you're going to solve? And how can you do it better than the 74 other companies that do something similar to you.
So where'd you begin with that then, Marcus? Because I mean, if it was me and you put me in that seat and you said, right, here's an organization, you're in front of the management team, get them to make some decisions. So my go-to tools, first of all, is Pareto, so 80-20 rule. I know that 80% of their sales are going to come from 20% of the customers. So, right, let's figure out, guys, who those 20% are. So that's my very first one. Then I'll be looking at things like must, should, could. So here's the stuff we must do to get those issues solved. Here's the stuff we should do with a a good fair wind and lots of resource. We should probably do those things, but we'll see. And then the could is like, yeah, well, those will be in our back pocket, but we're never going to get the time or energy to do those. So for me, those are the two kind of lead things. And then also when we've got an action plan together, I go straight to urgent and important, and I plot things out on a graph. So things can be urgent, but they might not be very important, and they can be very important, but actually we haven't put much urgency into them. So I'm plotting that graph out with all the various actions. That's my go-to. What do you do?
Very similar. Pareto principle, 80-20, and I've spoken a lot about this, the 80-20 and theory of constraints, and there's a lot of similarities between them, basically different models to look at the same problem. How do you focus on the areas of greatest impact? That's basically it, right? You could do that both on the strategy side, on the, who's our target audience, what is our pain point that we're solving for them, or multiple pain points. And you could also do it on the tactics, right? So you think about what's urgent, what's not urgent, what's important, and really looking at it in terms of, if you think about an analogy I like is a chain, and every chain has a weakest link, right? So you can, if we step back and we look at the company itself growing, that's the goal. The company itself is a series of big links in a chain, right? Those are all basically the fundamental outcomes that have to happen in order for the company to grow. So one big link is marketing, one big link is sales, one big link is product development, and on, HR, whatever it is, right? And you start with, let's say we're focusing on the marketing side, right? We're going to look at that big link. Now, that big link in the chain, you can think of it as it's another chain with smaller links, right? So stick with me. It's not going to get too in the weeds, but basically each one you can look at what's the weakest link here. So as a really easy to picture practical example of this, how many times have you either consulted with or been in a company that obsesses about creating this amazing website? They're rebranding or they're launching and they want to create this amazing looking complex website, right? And they're investing hundreds of hours and tens of thousands of dollars into this thing, but they haven't yet made a decision about what their primary value prop is, or their ideal customer, or any of the things. So they're trying to fill in now this complicated website with a bunch of copy. They're in the wrong spot of this, right? And if you look back and say, what is that 80-20, or what is that weakest link in the chain? Well, the weakest link right now is we still haven't made this decision about what our product's going to focus on, or where we're most competitive, or all these things, right? A lot of different ways you have to look at it. But at some point, it's like items or stations in a factory, right? If the first machine in a factory is busted, it doesn't make any sense to try to make the other ones perfect, because that first busted one is going to slow everything down. Look for that first weakest link. And if you find that, hey, listen, we're spending all this time worrying about this whiz-bang website, but we haven't even made the decision about what our product is going to focus on, that's where you start. And so if you can make the case to your team or your upper management about why are we looking at this part instead of the whiz-bang website, or going to trade shows, right? Like, how many companies have you seen at trade show, or whatever we want to call them now, at events, and they have like a totally generic value prop, right? But they're spending tens of thousands of dollars on a booth, and like it doesn't make any sense. So if you can make the argument, and it aligns with basically being able to influence others and help them understand why it makes sense to do something over another. If you can demonstrate it in that kind of term, it helps people see, oh, wait, that makes sense. So you're not just the person that's like beating the drum about strategy or positioning. You're actually demonstrating like, look, this, if we spend all this money and time on a perfect website, it's still going to do us no good if the messaging on there is completely generic.
So ultimately, then it's ROI, isn't it? It's return on investment of, well, it's not just
Time.
capital investment. It's time, it's
Yeah.
energy, it's the things that we could be doing otherwise. If we weren't doing this thing here, we could be doing something else. And it's making sure that all the time it's with the best ROI intention. And you've got to decide then, I guess, as a marketer or as a management team, what is the return that we're looking for? Because it could be financial, that might be the name of the game, but it might not be. That could be interesting. It could be, no, actually, it's not financial for now because cash reserves are fine for this year. So we know we can pay all the bills. Actually, we want to break into this new market, or we've got this incredible product innovation. So we want to go there. And this is the year we can do it. So it could be the decisions are being made, not necessarily just purely revenue and sales, which most people kind of think that's the only ROI you can get. But actually, the return could be something subtly different, couldn't it? Gives choice.
Yeah, there's also another layer to this where the cultural dynamics of working within a company, right? So I don't know if you've read Cal Newport's newer book, Slow Productivity. One of the things he talks about is pseudo productivity, right? Where we're living in a Slack age, right? Where we're knowledge workers. And if you're working in a marketing department at a company of any size, what is the one thing that you can show as productivity? How fast you reply to Slack message, how quickly you're returning emails, how many Zoom meetings you're in, right? So all this pseudo productivity, because it's hard to demonstrate or measure a really good positioning strategy, right? That's not very interesting looking to most people. It's hard to tell whether I'm doing my job, right? If I'm sitting here spending 3 days really thinking about what is our positioning going to be, that looks like I'm not doing anything, but that's probably the most valuable place I could be putting my attention. So there's a lot of cultural and workplace and hustle culture dynamics that are also at play here that go beyond just whether it's good marketing. It goes to how we value our time in general. If you think about, there's certainly companies that are exception to this, but if you think about the typical work experience, if you were to put on your calendar unavailable for 3 hours a day because you're thinking about stuff, people would start to go like, wait a minute, that doesn't look like work. The weird thing about it is that's probably, especially if leadership or you're trying to create a strategy or solve problems, that's probably the best use, certainly much better than sitting on the 7th Zoom call that day where everybody's just talking about the work that they talked about last week that they're going to talk about again next week. So there's lots of dynamics here that I think people beyond just marketing can relate to, and really understanding that, like, if you want to understand where the bottlenecks are, be willing to also do the type of work that doesn't look like furious busy work that we're also used to, and give yourself permission. And more importantly, if you're in a leadership position, give your team permission to do the actual deep work that they need to be able to solve these types of problems.
That example that you just gave there about the spending time thinking, I mean, I've actually been there. This is a long time ago. It's actually one of the very first roles I ever had. So I'm a junior here at this point. And the director actually says in a meeting, there's a team meeting, actually says, right, I'm going to be taking this morning off to think. And I'm thinking, hey, that's cool. I want to do that too, because I've got loads of thoughts. I've got loads of ideas. I'm introverted, so I'm a real reflector just naturally. So I thought, well, that'd be really good. So then I bring that up and I'm absolutely laughed out of town. Well, you're a doer. You haven't got time to think. Get back to doing. And I thought, you've really missed the point here. Hold on. Do you not realize what I could be capable of if you just give me a little bit of time and energy to do that thinking? I mean, it's laughable now because I spend most of my time professionally thinking on behalf of clients and coming up with ideas and the like. But I could have done it then. And actually, it could have been a fresh idea that would have been a game changer because I didn't have all the baggage. So to me, one of those challenges there is to almost take seriously those naive little moments from a little junior who's not meant to know anything because, well, what would they know? They haven't been in business for 50 years. No, and I know, and that's the point. So maybe this is something, I don't know what your take on this one is, but maybe there's something about, yes, part of the ROI as a marketer is to do the production. Part of it is to do the communication, the propositions, the decision making, but actually part of it is to reflect and actually take time out, even if it's a tiny little piece of time. That has to be valuable, doesn't it? No matter what level you're working at.
It's the most valuable thing you can be doing, especially as we move into AI. I mean, we've had AI, but especially as now it's going to become much more prevalent. We're never going to be able to outwork in that, when I say work, I just mean like typing. You're never going to be able to outright as far as output of words. I'm not one of those people that think that, any kind of machine learning or any kind of AI is going to have a perspective that's more important than the human perspective. That's a whole nother conversation. But, when it comes to like the external obvious measures of what would be, pseudo productivity is how many emails are you sending out and how quick are you on Slack, how many Zoom meetings, all that stuff. That's not the value. That never was the value. The value was, again, going back to the soft skills. How good are you at critical thinking? How good are you at creative thinking? How good are you at being able to be present with somebody in a conversation and actually hear what they're saying and go beyond just waiting to hear for your chance to talk so you could tell them your idea and then you're just back and forth with that. You know how many Zoom meetings are like that? How many Zoom meetings have you been on in a team where the other person on the call that's not talking is like doing this and they're typing? This is supposed to be the productive use of our time. It's madness. And it's one of the reasons why I really enjoy being self-employed and working as a freelancer or a coach or whatever, is that I determine for myself what makes sense. And there's a time in my day that makes sense just to be in creative mode and deep work. And there's no alerts. There's nothing going on. And then there's a time of the day where I'm on Zoom calls or I'm doing a podcast, and that's all awesome. Right. But I'm not going to try and do them both at the same time. And I think that if you work at a company, I can't imagine, I don't think I would last very long if I was expected to write copy and then while I'm still replying to Slack messages in real time. Like I can't do it. Maybe some people can, but it doesn't work for me. I think it doesn't work for a lot of people considering the burnout rates that we're seeing.
I totally agree. And I think what we've identified, well, what you've identified here, Marcus, is there are some fundamental stepping stones here to kind of really overcoming these marketing challenges that we've been talking about. And it is about prioritizing. It is about decision making. It's, where are the weakest links? I love that phrase, pseudo productivity. I think we can all be really honest and say, even if we're super productive, procrastination, we've all done it. And then this whole thinking and reflecting and building these kind of little mini projects for our own world, I think there's a lovely almost set of things to go away and think about. And if you've been listening to this whole episode and kind of really want to sort of take this forward, I mean, I think we're kind of in sort of collaboratively suggesting that these are great starting point. But what I want to do, Marcus, is put people in direct connection and contact with you. Where should they go to make further contact with you?
Best place is my website, marcusschaller.com, MarcusSchaller.com. And, hit me up on LinkedIn and let me know if you heard me here with Neil, and I'd love to connect and chat more.
Wonderful. It's just been great. And it's so good for me to kind of share just this thinking and this moment of reflection with, like-minded person, because I think, a lot of what we've said here, I think we both know that this stuff works. So I'd be very confident putting this out, and everybody's going to take their own little kind of personal translation of it. And that's absolutely the right way. But I think, what you've highlighted here, Marcus, are some really key points here. And let's face it, we're all trying to overcome some of these challenges. So I thank you on behalf of the audience today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.